Hey, friends. Today we are going to be talking about Christians and mental health, as well as the stigma around mental illness for Christians. In my own private practice, I've worked with thousands of patients who have endured the myriad of mental health issues. Yet I've seen some of the greatest shaming coming from fellow believers. How do we combat that stigma? Today, we're going to be talking about Christians and mental health and the stigma that exists around mental health for Christians. Welcome back to another episode of your hope-filled perspective, where it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God-given identity. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and I'm thankful when you choose to spend a few minutes of your week with us. Today, we are going to be talking about Christians and mental health and the stigma around mental illness for Christians. My guest today received a diagnosis of bipolar disorder and is going to share a bit of his story and the insights that he has gleaned through his journey. But first, I want to remind you of the scripture that comes from Joshua 1, verse 9, that says, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." My guest today is Paul Gaumer. Being a Christian and living with mental illness is a confusing, frustrating, and emotionally draining daily journey that asks the question, why me, Lord? When the demons have a stronghold on your life, God can seem so far away. But Paul lives with these challenges each day, and he's bringing insight into how he continues to focus on God while living with the daily struggles of bipolar disorder. Paul has written a book, A Walk with the Light in the Shadows. A Walk with the Light in the Shadows that details his daily journey with the Lord while living with the effects of bipolar disorder. Welcome to the program, Paul.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so honored and humbled to be here.
You know, it was an honor to come across your book at the Christian Product Expo in August of 2022. And it piqued my interest, of course, because as a mental health practitioner for over 30 years, I love seeing people break down the walls of stigma and sharing their story, because I really believe as we become vulnerable and willing to share, it helps others say me too, and it helps them realize that they're not alone. So I so appreciate your willingness to write the book and come on the program.
Thank you.
What I know is that living with any kind of mental health issue is a challenge. So Paul, will you take us back prior to your diagnosis and tell us what life was like leading up to that diagnosis?
Absolutely. I was born in West Central Illinois, a very, very small town, and I was not in a Christian household. We did that stereotypical, we went to church on Christmas and Easter, and that was about it. But my family, my father worked all the time. He was never home. And when he was home, he drank a lot. And I think my mom was a little bit ashamed of that, to kind of go out in public with that stigma wrapped around that. So we just chose never to go to church. My grandfather's brother was a pastor, so I did have an opportunity a few times to go with them, to go listen to him preach. But I just didn't know the Lord in any way, shape, or form. As a matter of fact, I didn't ask Jesus into my heart until I was 34 years old. But back then, I was kind of a wild child. As a matter of fact, once I got into high school, I got into drugs. I got into drinking a lot of alcohol. I was following my father's pattern as far as the alcohol goes. And I got in with the wrong crowd. I was trying to find my way in high school, and I didn't really fit in with the jocks. I really didn't fit in with the smart kids. I really didn't fit in with the band. So I was trying to find my way. And unfortunately, my way back then was kind of getting in with the people that did the drugs and alcohol. They accepted me for who I was, and no judgment whatsoever. So, I always say once I got through that period in my life, that I met my wife when I was 20 years old, and she and God saved me. Now, back then, I didn't know it was God that was intervening in that, but at this, at that point, she was more mature than I was, and she kind of helped me out of that valley that I was in, and I was so grateful for that. She was raised in a Christian household and kind of fell away from God.
Okay.
So we were just two ships in the night trying to figure out our way
Yeah.
with that.
When you look back now, even though your father had a propensity for alcohol, so often what I saw in so many patients who ultimately received a diagnosis of bipolar disorder is that so often they attempted to self-medicate with drugs or alcohol or sex or gambling or workaholism. I mean, the list goes on and on. I know it's hard to know for sure, but when you look back, do you think that was at play in your use of those substances?
I do. I when I was diagnosed with bipolar, there was a couple month period leading up to that was very dark in my life. But now that I'm able to actually speak about it, I was so ashamed for so long. Now that I'm able to actually speak about it, and I've written this book, I can look back on that period of my life, and there were propensities for mental health and mental illness issues back then. I went through bouts of depression, but back then, guys didn't talk about that.
Right.
I went through bouts of anxiety where I couldn't sleep at night. And I thought it was all around, the alcohol and the drugs. And then come to find out, even after I got married and got away from those things, I still found myself being anxious in the strangest situations, a family gathering. Um, I can only be with them for so long. And then I had to separate myself. I had to go into the room by myself. And I found that my relaxation is listening to classical music. So I would go in and listen to classical music and just try to get away for a while. And um, I now that I look back, I can tie it all to God was with me through this whole thing. I can see his presence in my life from teenage years up until the diagnosis and now to current. I see him in my life in the way that he saved me so many times back then. That had to be a God intervention because, as ashamed as I am of it, so many times I just drank myself into a stupor and drove home, 10, 15, 25 miles home. How
Wow.
I didn't kill someone else or kill myself, it's only God. It's God's intervention.
Sure.
And I believe that he has given me this opportunity to be his vessel to speak about mental health and mental illness issues in the Christian community.
And this is not always the case, but I would dare to say probably more often than not, someone has to kind of reach rock bottom before they can walk past the shame to try to reach out to get help, because so
Yes.
often shame keeps us bound and keeps us from admitting we have a problem to anybody else. We know it, but we don't want anybody else to know. And shame so often keeps us from seeking out help. So what was it for you that ultimately led to you getting the help and getting a diagnosis so that then you could get appropriate help?
So there was a period of time, as I said, about 3 or 4 months before my diagnosis, where the anxiety, the depression got so bad
Yeah.
that I just could not shake it. There was no waking up in the morning and shaking it. There was, I became a Christian in November of 2000. My diagnosis didn't actually come to 2012 until 2012. Um, and as I started to struggle more and more, as I got closer to the diagnosis, I felt like God was farther and farther away from me.
Mm,
Never once did I blame God. It was more of a, what's happening to me?
yeah.
Why am I not in the word every single day? Why am I not doing my devotions every morning? Why do I have these voices in my head that tell me that I'm not good enough? I'm not worthy, self-harm issues. So there was a day that came where my wife was gone, the house was empty, and I felt like I'd had enough. The voices and the demons were so strong that that day I was just going to end it. And I had come to that conclusion. I cried out to God. To me, I didn't feel like there was an answer given to me, so I felt like I had no other choice. So I walked into my bedroom and I pulled out the shotgun, and that was my full plan, was to take care of it. Now, what's weird is I was a hunter, so it's not unusual to have a gun in the house. But I went to reach for the box of shells and it was empty. And if anybody knows me, knows that I always had ammunition around my house. So that box was empty, and I fell to my knees at that point, just sobbing, asking God to please intervene. And I did feel a peace come over me at that time. But I was also ashamed that I was even thinking what I was thinking to do. And from that point forward, I went to my wife and I told her exactly what happened. And I said, I need to get some help. And so I made a doctor's appointment. And after some further testing between a couple of different doctors, the diagnosis was made that I had bipolar 2 disorder.
Now, you may not know the answer to this, but was there any rhyme or reason why the ammunition would have been empty?
No, because friends of ours, every Sunday after church, we would go out and shoot clay pigeons every single Sunday. So I always had 2 or 3 boxes with me at all time of the ammunition for the shotgun. And I had no full boxes at all. And the box that I normally felt like there was ammunition in there and ready to go was empty. So the only thing is, it's God's intervention.
Yeah.
I still to this day can't wrap my mind around that, because that is just not me. I'm a very organized person. I'm always ahead of when I'm supposed to be at an appointment. I just get everything, has to be just perfect. It's my routine with dealing with this disorder, especially. And there is no rhyme or reason to it. I've never had a box of empty ammunition when I've gone out to go hunting or to go shoot clay pigeons. It's just never happened.
Now, there are different forms of bipolar disorder, and you've mentioned relying on alcohol and substances, but how else did it manifest for you? Some patients with bipolar will have extreme highs and extreme lows. Others will not. And so I don't want to presume how your experience was, but the reason why I'm asking this question is because I know that we have people listening who have friends and family members who might display signs and symptoms of bipolar disorder and they don't even know it. So I'm curious how yours took hold.
Yeah, my manifestation is more of the depressive side. So I have sometimes long bouts of depression. Of course, medication helps with that, but there are times where it doesn't even feel like that's helping. Now, I'm not saying that I don't have my manic, where I'm cleaning the house at 3 o'clock in the morning, or I'm talking super fast to someone. I'm not saying that I don't have those episodes, but my tendency is more depressive episodes. Feelings of low self-worth or low self-esteem, or I tend to make mountains out of molehills, which makes it worse.
Yeah.
I tell the story to my kids. I told my story one time that I said, if I text your mom, which I do every single night on my way home from work, I text her and tell her that I'm leaving because I live an hour and a half away. When I text your mom and she doesn't text me back immediately, my mind goes to, is she having an affair? Why is she not answering her text? One of those types of things. So I have that tendency of manifesting things that do not exist.
Yeah.
So I've been told from my therapist, that's part of the issues that go along with bipolar as well.
Yeah, it certainly can be. I'm curious, how did your diagnosis impact your relationship with God?
As I said early on, I never really blamed him, but I wanted answers. And this leads to the book a little bit. So I wanted answers, and I felt God leading me to start writing my feelings down. So I started journaling. Now, that's just not who I am, right? I've never considered myself an author. I never considered myself a journal person, but I actually started sitting down and just writing out feelings. And in my mind, and come to find out this was God led as well, but in my mind, I felt myself wanting to put together a journal for my wife and kids to
Mm,
better explain my daily struggles that I have,
yeah.
um, because sometimes it's hard for me to vocalize that.
Mm,
And you probably know this better than anybody. For a guy to come out and be vulnerable about everything that they're feeling, that's
yeah.
just, it just doesn't happen. So in my mind, especially growing up in a household where, my dad was the man and my mom wasn't really allowed to do anything because the man had to do it. So I kind of had that mindset as well. Um, but I found myself journaling, and then the next thing I know, it's kind of developing into chapters. I would tell part of my story, and then I felt like that was the end of that part of the story. But then I was also led to start another part of the story and another part of the story. And the next thing I know, it kind of led into chapters instead of just being a journal for my family.
Paul, will you talk for a minute about how stigma has impacted your mental health? That's part of our conversation today, is about Christians and mental health, but specifically also about the stigma around mental health for Christians.
Yeah, when I was first diagnosed, I was so embarrassed and so ashamed, and I almost thought it was my fault. How could I let myself get that way? And then I started thinking, well, maybe the alcohol did it to me, or maybe the drugs that I took did it to me. I was trying to kind of figure all that out, and it wasn't until God started leading me to journal to where I became more open about the struggles that I'm facing. Now, there were still questions about being a Christian, because when I became a Christian in 2000, within a month, I took a new Christians class. And after I come out of that class, it was like life was going to be roses and rainbows, and you would never have any problems again. Now, we all know better than that, but it's clearly stated in the Bible that that is not the case. But in
Right.
my mind, that's what I thought. And so trying to reconcile that as well, of God, I've been faithful to you. God, I'm in your word every single day. God, I'm doing my devotions. God, I have a prayer list and I praise you. Why is this all happening? So I think the first step to break that stigma, and where I feel like God's led me in this, is I have to be vulnerable. I have to be open about my feelings. And I have to make people aware that just because you're a Christian, that you won't struggle with these types of issues.
Amen,
And
brother.
oh, one day in church, I was talking to someone about potentially writing a book. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not an author. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I just feel like God's leading me to do this. And the person that I was speaking to said, I have struggled with anxiety and depression for 30 years and I've never told anyone. And because I'm a Christian, I'm not supposed to be struggling with these types of things. I go, sister, I hear you. I'm a Christian. I'm not supposed to be struggling with these types of things either. So that opened the door for me to then go speak to my pastor about how I felt like, and part of the reason for the title of the book is people are walking in the shadows with these things. They're afraid to come into the light with this because they're afraid they're going to be ridiculed, or they're going to be looked down upon. And God was in my heart so much about this. I'm like, I'm going for this. I'm going to go for it. And I'm going to open my life, and we'll just see where this thing plays. And it has played out wonderfully. And I've had such great feedback, had the opportunity to speak in front of churches and, youth groups. We have a wonderful camp here locally that do retreats for everything from elementary school all the way up to college age. And I've had the chance to go out and talk to the kids about it's okay to not be okay as a Christian. It's okay to be able to have a discussion with someone that you're close to in your life, telling them that you're not okay. And so I think by me, every time I do that, I get a little more comfortable with discussing it with everybody. Now that the book is out, I really don't have a choice.
Yeah.
It's all out there for the world to see, for sure.
I know that when I was struggling with depression, I was so ashamed because here I was, the doctor with all the alphabet soup after my name. Like, I thought I should have been able to prevent it. And I didn't want anyone to know. I was so ashamed. And I thought, well, if referral sources know, they're not going to send patients to me because they're going to think I don't have all the answers. And if patients know, then they're going to lose respect because I should be doing the same thing I recommend to my patients. But really, Paul, what I've come to realize is those were all lies from the enemy,
Right.
and that shame only has power over us when we try to keep those secrets,
Agreed.
when we keep things in the dark. That's why I like the title of your book, A Walk with the Light in the Shadows, because it's when we reveal these things and bring them into the light that Satan doesn't have the same power anymore. It doesn't mean we
Agreed.
won't ever struggle, but it's different when we're
Agreed.
willing to come out into the light.
And it's weird because that title of that book came in the dead of night. I was struggling to kind of put together what I wanted it to say, how I wanted it to impact, so people would be willing to understand what the story was about. And in the middle of the night, one night, I just woke up, sat straight up in bed and go, I got it. I got the name of this book. And I was able to put that down. And the next day, my daughter-in-law is an artist. The next day I said, the name of the book is this, please paint something around this. And that's what you're seeing on the book cover itself. She hand painted that first shot. I didn't make any corrections to it whatsoever.
Love it. Friends, we're going to take a real short commercial break, but I don't want you to go anywhere, because when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation with Paul Gaumer about Christians and mental health and the stigma around mental health in Christians. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope-filled perspective. Friends, we're talking about a sensitive topic that we really need to be having more discussions about. Today, we're talking with Paul Gaumer about Christians and mental health, and specifically the stigma around mental health in Christians. Paul, from your perspective, how does stigma manifest itself towards Christians who struggle with mental health issues?
Well, I just think that we are so programmed as humans to not show vulnerability. The stigma of struggling with suicidal thoughts, or struggling with, anxiety, or, the instance I gave earlier about having to separate myself away from my family, is embarrassing. It's so embarrassing. So if it's embarrassing to you, you just feel like you're going to be a burden or an embarrassment to someone else, whether it be friends or family. So I think we create that stigma. It's just never been talked about enough. And I've had two very, very close friends who have taken their life. Both were Christians and both attended my church. And that really, no one really wanted to talk about it. It was so sad because they were so active in our church, and the demons just got too much of them. And they felt like they had no hope and no way back. But after it happened, no one wanted to discuss it. And right then I thought, this is a topic that really needs to be talked about. And I think the lady that I spoke to that one day at church, she said that she struggled for 30 years and never told anyone, was that door that opened for me to be able to share my story with her, and then have the strength for her and I to actually talk to the pastor about it, and just systematically break down this wall of stigmas that it is okay to struggle as a Christian. You're never promised that you won't. So
Right.
to be able
In fact,
to
we are promised we will struggle.
correct. So, I just think once those barriers start to begin, and when I've gone out and done speaking engagements, I've had people come up to me afterwards and said, you're so brave. It's not me. It's not my bravery. It's God speaking through me, and me being his vessel, and him giving me the strength to be able to share my story, and giving me the strength to not be scared or nervous, or just to put it out there. My hope with this book, or even a speaking engagement, was if I can lead one person to Christ because of my story, or if I can lead one person to be able to go to that person that they trust, to open up and say, I heard Paul speak and I'm having these struggles, then this whole thing's worth it. I think that's what God's leading me to do. I know that's what's God leading me to do, because this is, I've talked to other authors who said, yep, I finished the book, I'm done. And that's it. Well, I finished the book, and I feel like I just started to be able to share this message and help break the stigma down. I've talked to a few pastors who said, you know, I went to them and I said, why don't we talk about this more in church? Why do you feel like that's not something that's discussed? To the pastor, they said, the reason we don't discuss it is we don't feel like we're trained enough to be able to address it after the fact. They're afraid to open Pandora's box. I get that. I really, truly get that. But as I said to my pastor, please don't let that stop you. You know, please don't let that stop you. Let's find a way to put together some type of mental health ministry, get trained professionals in here, and just be able to start having conversations with our congregation. And that's what we've done. We've begun that journey, and it's just been so fulfilling to see God work in people's lives.
I think professionally, what I've seen too is that the other factor that contributes to stigma is that frequently stigma is the result of a lack of understanding and compassion.
Yes.
When people come across individuals like myself or yourself who are going through things that they've never gone through, so they don't understand it, I think it's frightening to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so they push back, they push away, or they try to put a spiritual Bible verse band-aid on it because they are uncomfortable. But the truth is, mental health issues are so prevalent. Just with depression alone, 1 in 4 will be at a diagnosable state at some point in their lives. So we can't
Yes.
escape it, even though we try by saying, oh, that's too heavy. I don't understand. I don't know how to do it. So I'm proud of you for starting the discussion within your own church body with that woman and with your pastor. But I'd be curious about your perspective on how can we begin the discussion with others?
Yeah, you know, I was talking to this kind of came up in a discussion with one of the senior high groups at the camp. And I said, let's hypothetically say that you're arrested. Now, wrongfully or not, you're arrested. And you're put into handcuffs and you're put in that vehicle and you're taken to jail. Who is that first person that you're going to call? Who is that one person that you know that you can call no matter how embarrassed you are, no matter how you know, where you just don't, you're so confused, that confusion, and they will not judge you. Who is that one person? And that's who you should start these discussions with, is that one person that you can trust. The discussions, you know, the love of my life outside of the Lord Jesus Christ is my wife. And being able to have a discussion with her about what I'm feeling and about that instance where I almost took my own life, to be able to have that discussion was embarrassing. It was humbling, but I knew that she would continue to love me without judgment and allow me to speak and give me direction, the direction that I didn't have the strength to find. Only the strength in Jesus, only the strength in God would give that to me. And being able to find that person or that tribe. I'm so proud of my family because I truly believe exactly what you said is when I first started talking about this, especially with my kids, it scared them. It scared is, you know, especially when I shared the full story, is dad going to be here tomorrow type of thing. So I've always said that you've got to find that one person to begin the discussion to help you navigate what you're feeling and to not dismiss what you're feeling. So many times, and I had a lady tell me this one time, I love the way that you talked about this. I love the way you shared your journey, but you just need to put it at the foot of Jesus and that will make it all better. And boy, you don't think I've tried that? you know,
Right.
so, you know, you can never dismiss away, no matter how unrealistic the feelings are. They're real to that person, and they're a lot of times they're very raw. And for me to be able to, and I've had my detractors on this too, where they, you know, just keep praying, just keep praying, just keep praying, just keep praying. And that's great because I do every single day, and I pray for strength. But there's some pretty good medication out there too that help me navigate my life, and very good professionals like yourself that have helped me understand Even the non-Christian professionals don't dismiss my faith or don't dismiss my feelings. And I think that helps. The problem is there's not enough of those resources in this country today. The area that I live, if I had to go seek more advanced professional help, I'd have to either go to Chicago or St. Louis, and which is 3.5 hours either way for me. And that makes me sad that we have more resources in this country.
I'm glad that you had your wife. And for the listener who's listening and saying, I don't have that trusted spouse, or I don't have that one friend that I could call from jail that I know would be there for me and not judge me. But that is a place where then I would say, reach out to a mental health professional.
Correct.
Because we won't judge you. We will walk with you through this, and we will try to help you on your journey to get through this. But we are not perfect. We are still fallible human beings, and we will make mistakes, and some therapist personality won't be the right fit for you. And so sometimes it does take trying 2 or 3 different mental health providers to find the one that you click with. But what I want you listeners to hear is that even when you feel and believe at your core that no one will listen and not judge you, you have a Savior in heaven.
Amen.
Who does not judge you, does not blame you for this, but wants to walk with you and is just waiting for you to say, walk with me, help me through this, show me what steps I need to take. And he's faithful.
Absolutely is. Absolutely is. There are times, I talk a lot about, and especially to my wife and family, most people walk through everyday life on a 50-50 playing field. So they have 50% logic going on, 50% emotion going on. But I said, imagine you're in the car and somebody cuts you off, or they take your parking spot that you've been waiting on. What happens to the logic then, right? Your emotions go to 90%, your logic's at 10. A lot of people with mental health issues, that logic or that emotion is peaked more than the logic is. And so, reaching out to a mental health professional can help you level that back out. Just the people that I've spoken to during our ministry, the mental health ministry, they just said, I just need someone to talk to. I just need someone to vent. I just need someone to hear me and to know that I'm real and what I'm feeling is real. And part of ours is we're more of a first responder. So we're going to speak and assess and then refer if necessary. And we let the mental health professionals do the diagnosis, do the prescribing, do all of that. But what I found is a lot of time people just want to talk and want to know someone's there that's not going to judge them. And that's the focus that we try to keep.
And a good therapist will allow you to talk, but will also be solution focused.
Yes.
So that you don't get stuck in that hamster wheel of just stewing over your current situation and not moving forward. A good therapist is going to listen, is going to empathize, but they're going to also try to move you forward in your healing journey.
Very much so. And I am so blessed that I've had those people in my life that have helped me. And I truly believe I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for God in my life. And if I didn't take the time to sit down and backtrack in my life and see how God was working, even in my teens, even when I was struggling with alcohol and drugs, see how God was there and protected me. And I can, I tell people I can just chain it all the way from there to my life today. And, God doesn't answer prayers sometimes immediately. You have to be still and know that I am God. Yeah. One of my favorite verses ever. It's tough sometimes when you're in the throes of depression to be still and know. And I have little plaques that remind me. I have a tattoo on my forearm that says hope. It's written in my wife's handwriting so that I have that little reminder every day. But um, I also keep my Bible very close. I get made fun of because I have 8 Bibles. I have one in my office. I have one in my living room. I have one at work. I have one in my car. Um, I, I get made fun of a lot for having 8 Bibles, but you never know when that time is where you need to grab that Bible and pull off on the side of the road and just open the word. Just let God's love flow through you, through
Yeah.
his word. And I can't tell you how many times that has helped me come out of a funk. Maybe not the full throes of depression, but just I could feel it coming on. And I go to the Lord and I give it all to the Lord and I open the word and just let that love flow through me. It's done so much in my life, so much.
I love that because by you having a Bible, even in your car, it's a lot like we're not going to go somewhere in our car without having jumper cables in case we need to
Right,
use that
right.
battery. And that Bible is jump starting you so that you don't fall all the way down into that pit. When you start noticing the signs and symptoms, when you go straight to the source, the one who can see you through and knows how he will see you through, it's like carrying those jumper cables with you. I
Right,
love
right.
that. Hey,
Very well.
friends, we're going to take a real quick commercial break, but when we come back, I'm going to ask Paul to share his hope-filled perspective with you. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope-filled perspective. Man, we've been having a good conversation today, and I hope that it's encouraging your heart. Even if you don't struggle with mental health issues, what Paul has been talking about is using Jesus and his word as our lifeline to get through difficult experiences. So you may not struggle with mental health, but you will have trials because Jesus told us so. So, Paul, as we wrap up this episode today, if a listener is resonating with our conversation today and has either been given a mental health diagnosis or they have a friend or loved one who has, what hope-filled perspective would you want to leave them with today?
Well, Jesus is hope. I mean, I could stop right there and just be done. Jesus is hope. But, as Christians, we want to ask questions why. And we may question God, even though it's in God's plan. Our days are written prior to us being born. So God knows the plan. God knows what your struggles are through. But, you know, the one thing that I have to tell you is there are others out there like you. And there are others out there as Christians who are struggling with the same things that you're struggling with, whether it be situational, whether it be chemical imbalance. There are others out there that are struggling. And you can't be afraid to talk as Christians. We have to stop this silence and walking in the shadows and bring it to the light, because once you bring it to the light, then Satan's stronghold on you is gone. And you have Jesus fighting for you. You have God's presence in your life that is helping you guide through these times. And there are going to be times where you have to ask for professional help. I would have loved to have been able to just sit and have a conversation with my wife and say, here are the feelings that I had. Here's what I almost did. But without professional intervention, I truly don't believe that I'd be here today. Between God's grace and love and professional intervention, I would not be here today. And so do not be afraid to talk. Find that person that is not going to judge you. Find that person, whether it be a friend, a family member, or a professional. Find that person that will not dismiss what you're feeling, because what you are feeling is real and it's raw. And don't you dare let somebody dismiss that. And so that my hope filled perspective is, there's hope in the Lord, and that there's hope in others, and let them help you navigate through these troubled waters. They are there for you. They're never going to leave you. God has made us that promise so many times throughout scripture, and believe it. Sometimes it's hard when your emotions are outweighing your logic, but just know that God is there with you this whole time.
And friends, what I want you to know, we've been talking about mental health issues in Christians and the stigma that surrounds it. But the word of God tells us that there is therefore now no condemnation, no shame for those who are in Christ Jesus. And so there is no shame in having a mental health disorder, and there is no shame in seeking help for it. In fact, I applaud you when you do. Paul, thank you so much for coming on the program and sharing out of your own experience, your own hurts and trials to encourage others. Friends, we're going to put all the information about Paul, where you can reach out to him, where you can get a copy of the book, A Walk with the Light in the Shadows. All of that will be in our show notes that you can find at drmichelleb.com. And friends, if there has been something in this episode that has encouraged you, or maybe God has put a friend or family member on your heart who may be struggling. You may not even know if there's a diagnosis there, but you know that something's just not right and they're hurting. Consider sharing this episode with them to offer hope and encouragement to them as well. And would you consider subscribing to the podcast so you don't miss a single episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective? As always, this has been Your Hope-Filled Perspective. I've been your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson. Until we meet again next week, may you have a hope-filled week.